it is now my pleasure to introduce Sam Esmail, Mr. Robot and Homecoming, and we're going to talk about the paranoid thriller.
Is it safe?
Is it safe?
Is it?
Is it, though?
I don't think it is, man. Not right now, not in this world.
What was the... getting us in a properly sinister frame of mind already. Okay, that's good. Do you remember the first paranoid thriller that you saw? That, I mean, even if you didn't recognize it as such.
It was the French Connection, which I don't know, maybe that's more of an action film now that I think about it, but I remember feeling super paranoid watching it. I was obsessively watching it. I was 5, and I loved Gene Hackman's character, and I just remember loving the tone of it, the vibe of it. I don't know if I understood what was going on or what the case was or how they were solving the crime, but I just remember loving the vibe. And it's kind of a weird genre to even like enjoy, right? Because it makes you paranoid and it gives you all this anxiety. It's a little bit like horror in that way, but there's a thrill to it that I just remember responding to.
I think we should start by defining the paranoid thriller, because the entire reason this thing exists is because we had this like over an hour-long phone call.
Talk about nerdy.
Arguing about what is a true paranoid thriller,
yes.
And we have different opinions. So why don't you give your definition of it? And
well, I think it comes down to tone, and it comes down to that sensation you feel, that thrill you feel when you don't quite trust the world around the characters, that there's something beyond what you're seeing and what the main character is seeing, and that it's the not seeing the whole picture.
Right.
And obviously we can get into details because we debated how most paranoid thrillers should end versus how some who get classified as paranoid thrillers will end, like we talked about Get Out. Right. Like if you guys, I assume a lot of you have seen that film. If you go online, the original ending of Get Out is not the happy ending that's currently out in theater, or that came out in theaters. The original ending is he gets arrested.
Right.
He goes to jail, and that was kind of in keeping with our definition of paranoid thrillers, is that the system wins in the end.
Right.
That's what happens in Parallax View and 3 Days of the Condor and all, whatever. I'm sure we're going to get into all that.
Yes, yes.
So Get Out had like the bones.
It did.
Of the paranoid thriller.
It did, and then that thing happened where it's like, you know what? If we have a happy ending on this, we'll make like at least $50 million more dollars.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, that's like what happened at the end of First Blood, which I don't think counts as a paranoid thriller. But the end of the movie version, First Blood, Rambo kills himself in despair.
I did not know that.
Yes, and then they did a test screening, and the audience, the cards came back, and the audience was like, this is one of the best action movies I've ever seen. If only he didn't die at the end. And the studio was like, And now there's like another Rambo movie coming out in a couple of months or something. So, but
can I just say the ending is kind of important to, I think what defines a paranoid thriller. And I'll use Rosemary's Baby as an example, because there's something really delicious about not getting the happy ending, but it's still a weird victory. Like Rosemary's Baby ends with
a weird victory.
Yeah, well, I mean, the baby only responds to her mom. I'm spoiling. I hope you all.
Spoiler alert.
But the baby happens to be Satan.
Yes.
I mean, that's the trade-off. And I just remember thinking, what an amazing ending, because you kind of get victory for your main character, but at the same time, there's this,
It is. Well, so just, to take it back a little further, I think that, the golden age of the paranoid thriller, in my opinion, is from probably the mid-'60s through, like, the early '80s, I think. And, like, at a certain point, for a variety of reasons, those kinds of movies stopped being made quite as much. But, like, there are other paranoid thrillers, and we've talked about some of them on the phone, that predate that. But I think the first one that I think everybody recognizes as a classic paranoid thriller is a Blow Up from 1966, which is Antonioni's film about this photographer who believes that he's witnessed a murder in a park, and he has what he thinks is the photographic evidence, and he's endlessly blowing up the negative, and he's scrutinizing the negative, trying to find, and it's a great sort of almost metaphor for like the kind of film nerdishness that's practiced now on the internet, where like the more he looks at it, the less sure he is of anything. Right. And so then we go from there into, once we get into the late 60s and we have Vietnam and Watergate in the 70s, and all of these fears that multinational corporations are taking over everything. Like it becomes this kind of paranoid stew, and that's when we start to get like the really heavy, like the ones that you not only love but have actually quoted from like directly.
Right.
Like we've got Klute. Klute's a big one, and the same director did these.
Pakula, yeah, the Paranoid trilogy.
Alan Pakula. The Paranoid Thriller, yeah, the Paranoid Trilogy as it's called. And he made more than those, but those are the big three.
Yeah.
Klute, and then the Parallax View with Warren Beatty.
Right, and All the President's Men.
And All the President's Men.
Yeah.
And those are all really, really classic. And they fit, except for All the President's Men, where,
the ending.
Spoiler alert, Nixon resigned.
Right.
These are movies that have what I consider to be the classic Paranoid Thriller ending, which is not only does the hero not get the closure that they seek, but they end the movie not quite knowing, they're close to an answer, but they don't get the answer. And the institution, whether it's government or corporation or some combination, is still in power. And it's questionable whether their fighting is something that's inspirational or if it just fills you with despair. But like the Parallax View is, I don't want to give away the ending of that, but let's just say it's not a happy ending. It's not a happy ending. The Conversation, I think, is that way too. That's from the same period, 1974.
Let me ask you something, because I don't have that much access to you, so now that I'm here, and we all have access to you. Is it, because you cited mid-'60s to early '80s, do you think it had something to do with the JFK assassination? Because I do remember when I was a kid, I was obsessed with the conspiracy theories around JFK. Clearly, it wasn't the magic bullet, and and I would, and this is pre-internet, so I'm going to the library reading all these books about it. That's how you went down rabbit holes back then. And I remember, and I was obviously obsessed with the Oliver Stone film at the time, but I wonder, because that was 1963, right? The assassination was 1963. I don't think the public at large believed the bullshit that was being fed to them.
No.
So I wonder if that sort of was the thing that kicked off.
And in fact, that's a weird bit of cultural amnesia, is this idea that like conspiracy theories surrounding political events are a fairly recent development. That it's like, 9/11 and the Gulf War and things like that. And it's like, no, it's a rich and proud and very old tradition, and in American politics and probably world politics, but like it started almost immediately with the Kennedy assassination. I'm from Dallas, by the way. I grew up in Dallas, and like in Dallas, we didn't talk about it. It was like that poor man. They didn't even say Kennedy's name a lot of the time. It's like, oh, that poor man.
Wow.
Yeah, and there was but they had a museum in Dealey Plaza where the assassination occurred, and across the street, somebody opened up a conspiracy museum. So many years into it. Yes, and it was all these alternate theories of who killed Kennedy. But I found in a vintage shop a magazine. I can't remember if it was Life magazine or somewhere else, but it was a cover about how the military-industrial complex really killed Kennedy. And the date on the cover of this magazine was 1966. So as early as that, people were, not trusting the official version. And remember, at the same time, we've got all these assassinations beyond Kennedy.
Right.
We've got Martin Luther King,
Malcolm
Robert
X.
Kennedy, Malcolm X, and they didn't kill him, but George Wallace.
George Wallace, right.
Right, and then the Parallax View is kind of about that.
Well, yeah, that's why I'm bringing it up, because the Parallax View had that commission, which is basically the Warren Commission, right?
We should set up the plot of the Parallax View for those who haven't seen it.
Well, you guys should see it. But the plot is, a senator gets assassinated in the very opening of the film, and he gets assassinated at the top of the Seattle's,
Space Needle,
the Space Needle. And one by one, all the people that happen to be around the assassination start getting murdered. And the last one being the girlfriend, an ex-girlfriend of Warren Beatty.
Right. Oh my God, and it's one of the greatest, I'm not going to spoil it for people who haven't seen it yet, but one of the greatest cuts in the history of movies.
Oh yeah.
It's like,
The way, well, I don't even know if I should spoil that. But, But the way she tells Warren Beatty, and of course Warren Beatty dismisses it, this is a crackpot theory, and then it comes.
And there she is, yeah.
There she is, yeah. And then the cut that he's talking about, again, I won't reveal it, but then Warren Beatty basically goes on this journey of trying to decide, well,
yeah, he's an alcoholic, anti-establishment newspaper reporter. He's an investigative reporter with problems with authority, and he decides like he's ideally suited to infiltrate this shadowy organization called the Parallax Corporation, which he believes it's a private contractors who are hired to carry out these assassinations, and make it seem like random, unhinged people committed them. And we actually have a clip here, which is like one of my very favorite clips from any paranoid thriller movie. It's not giving anything away, but I want to watch it just because it's so creepy and cool. So let's lower the lights. So I want to take a second and talk about the filmmaking in that scene, because this is a subject of a great study and fascination for you. Like, what makes that scene paranoid and creepy?
Well, the lack of music. There's a lot of air. I just realized one of the great things about Parallax View, the performances, the cinematography, and that's part of the reason why that scene is creepy, is you can barely see their faces, their eyes, but it's the editing. And you talked a lot about the other sequence, the famous sequence in Parallax View where it's all editing.
Yes.
For I forget how long that sequence is.
4 minutes.
4 minutes.
And 23 seconds, I think.
You'll know what we're talking about when you see the film. But that scene, I'm imagining if that film were cut today, there'd be no air and dialogue. But it's the air.
Yes.
It's the air.
Well, and even that extra beat, like after that guy leaves, there's a moment where he pauses and then he goes over to the door and he looks through the peephole.
Yeah.
And there's not a whole lot of close-ups in there either.
No.
It's interesting.
And even you can't make out faces. Everything, you can't read what one person's saying, trying to say to the other. It's.
And there's also something about the framing of it, just the shadows, like you say. But there's something about the framing of it that makes me feel like I am hiding in the corner of the apartment looking at them, something.
Yeah, it's a lot of it has to do, and this is what I meant earlier when I was just trying to define the genre in general. It's what you can't see. And a lot of that is framing. I remember there's this great documentary called Visions of Light, which is about, basically it's a bunch of great cinematographers talking about filmmaking. And if you ever see Rosemary's Baby, which by the way is kind of the godfather of paranoid thrillers, there's a scene where you go on Ruth, why am I blanking on her name? Ruth, the mom.
Gordon.
Ruth Gordon.
Yes.
She's sitting on the bed, and the camera kind of pushes in, and it kind of comes around, but her back is to us.
There's a door frame in the foreground.
And there's a door frame in the foreground, and the cinematographer was like, we have to come around. We can't see her face. And Polanski was like, no, just keep it like that. And the cinematographer didn't understand it. And when they screened the film, when that scene came on, everybody in the theater just went like this.
Yeah.
And that to me, it's wanting people, it's getting people engaged enough to want to look, to want to see, but they just quite can't. That's where the paranoia comes from. Okay,
so now I want to show a clip from Mr. Robot that reminds me a little bit of that scene. And I think you'll know what I mean. Let's go ahead and show that one. This is another one where the framing and the lighting are important in determining how we feel. Yes, and now I can't, and I watched that scene, and like one of the first things I notice about it is the framing. It's very peculiar framing. Very peculiar. Like there's pieces of the architecture.
Yeah.
But it's almost like you've cut the house in half or something. It's almost like a cross section. And you also do that, now I call it the Mr. Robot shot, where people are in the extreme lower left or lower right-hand corner of the frame, and it's that negative space thing you're talking about.
Right.
What is that? What are you trying to do to us there?
Well, I think when I see that framing, it's not as if I invented that composition, but when I see it, it gives me, without saying anything, I start to feel unsettled. I start to feel like I should not be looking at what I'm supposed to be looking at, which is the character, but that I should be looking around the character. And that to me is that's what we've been talking about. That is to me, that is what gives you that that paranoia that you should be taking in the surroundings, not just a person. The other thing is that it creates this kind of sense that the world is coming down on that character. That there's this great shot. I didn't direct this. One of the few episodes of Mr. Robot I did not direct. Deborah Chow directed it. It was in episode 6 of the first season, and Terrell is like this small. I mean, she went for it. I mean, he's far away, and he's this small, and it's this big conference room that's all around him, as if he was drowning in the corporate world, and that's sort of his arc in that first season. So it was all those elements that fed into why I decided to do that kind of composition.
When you're looking around the frame, when you're looking around that empty space, what is the viewer looking for?
Well, specifically with this scene, this is, you got to remember, I mean, there's so many layers in this scene because Elliot has discovered that Darlene is hacking him. Darlene did hack him, not for the reasons she's telling him, but because she's been flipped by the FBI, and there literally is someone surveilling, and that is the safe house of the FBI that is under surveillance. So that house, that room, is incredibly important. That is the third character in that. That is literally the question that's being, the dramatic question that's being asked in that scene. What are you doing? Elliot asking Darlene, what are you doing to me? And it's that house. That house is the answer.
And so we have now, let's go a little deeper with this. We have the narratives of these paranoid thrillers. Like, they push against the commercial narrative that we get from most Hollywood movies, which is there's a hero, they have a goal, they make their progress through the world, they have their friends, they have their foils, they have their enemies, and in the end, they achieve their goal. And everything is wrapped up at the end. And like in the paranoid thriller, we usually don't get that kind of closure. Like, sometimes we don't get any closure at all, and sometimes we get like a minor sort of closure, like they bring, like, the 3 Days of the Condor. Like, that's a sort of a modified happy ending.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel like everything's going to be fine now, but I feel like at least they stopped the beast, sort of.
Right.
But so that's what's happening at the level of the story.
Right.
But at the level of the filmmaking, it's almost like the filmmaking is also, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's the idea, the reason why I enjoy going to movies, and a lot of the reasons why I don't enjoy a lot of the movies that are getting made, that are more of these mainstream blockbuster films, is that I want to work a little bit when I watch a story. I don't want to be told every, a lot of these movies when I saw Godzilla this morning. I went to the 4DX theater, the chairs were shaking and all, and it had some interesting ideas. I read your review. I got it. But I wasn't thinking at all while I was watching.
Sure.
I was being entertained. I ate my popcorn and I left, and I probably forgot about 5 seconds later.
Well, and there's no point in the movie where you're going, why are they showing me this and why are they showing it to me in this way? It's not that sort of movie.
No, and that's okay. But the movies I really enjoyed, and part of the reason, again, why this genre works why it resonates so well with me is that it engages me. It makes me sit up. Like that story I was telling you in Rosemary's Baby, where it makes you lean over. Mm-hmm. There's a level of engagement that if I find it's more of it enriches that entertainment value for me because you're working to understand this, unpack the story a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And so as a filmmaker, I don't want to show you everything. In fact, I'm trying to find clever ways not to show you everything, but still put it in the frame. I mean, because you can go the opposite. You could be completely, incoherent and not show the audience anything, and that's not entertaining either. But the idea is to show it to you without having it spoon-fed. And so it's there right in front of you. And that's where we get creative in the filmmaking, and when to move the camera, how to compose, and how to put things how to light and put things into shadow and reveal it at the right time. And by the way, editing, that's another big factor.
Right.
That sequence in Parallax View.
Yes.
Where when to cut and when to disorient people.
Right.
So that it's like Parallax View does this very well, where there's a lot, like the cut you were talking about, but there's a lot of jump cuts you do not see in mainstream films where you're like, wait, did I miss something? And the answer is yes. And that's completely
and editing, and
intentional.
like a lot of these movies, they're edited so that, like, a friend of mine who's a cinematographer pointed this out years ago. He said, like, in this genre, often, like, if you watch enough movies and they're all kind of made in the same way, you start to get used to, you sort of know when they're going to cut. And if you change when things happen, like if you cut before or after people probably expect it, it makes you feel uneasy, right? And something, I guess, similarly could be happening, like you talk about the silence.
Yes.
If we're not used to silence in movies, then if there's a lot of silence, it freaks us out.
Yeah, it makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Or a lot of times, like for example with music, you'd have score, you'd have a needle drop, and then all of a sudden the music cuts out. There's no like big sting out, or no like the scene ends and concludes and the music, no, it just cuts.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're like, wait, am I supposed to put, you know, like, and that's the idea, is like, put down, you cannot watch Mr. Robot and be on Twitter at the same time. And that's sort of by, or you won't enjoy it, or you're just not going to know what the fuck is going on. I mean, but that's the enjoyment. That's the enjoyment. It isn't the show that you can just kind of watch with one eye, you know. If
you have a story that is basically a paranoid thriller, and at the end of it the bad guys are exposed and righteousness is restored, is it really a paranoid thriller? This is what we keep going back and forth. Well, like Enemy of the State is my favorite example, because you got The Conversation,
yes,
which is not that kind of movie, and
nope.
then you got Gene Hackman in Enemy of the State playing like kind of like the same guy. It's not the same name, but you know,
basically the same character.
It's basically the same character. He's a surveillance person.
Right.
And you get to the end of that, and it's a '90s movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Tony Scott.
It's Tony Scott. I'm going to tell you, it's not a spoiler to say if it's a Tony Scott film, the good guys win ultimately.
Yeah. Written, by the way, by Tony Gilroy, who also directed a great paranoid thriller, Michael Clayton, that came out
right.
12 years ago.
Yes, yes.
But I will say this, I do think the bad guys get exposed, but I don't think they lose. And that to me is like the difference, right? Rosemary's Baby, at the end of Rosemary's Baby, the bad guys get exposed, but the hero doesn't, quote unquote, win. It's the same thing with Parallax View, to a certain extent, right? They get exposed, but then, you know, again, we won't spoil it.
Yes, yes.
So I do think there is that caveat, that there's the victory in that. Like, almost like the paranoia that you were feeling throughout the whole film gets confirmed for you.
Yes.
But that doesn't feel, you know, but that's not that's not the same thing as a victory. That's what I love about that.
But if we move forward in time, we move forward like beyond that sort of golden early era of the paranoid thriller, we start to see these kind of hybrids, like, you know, we've mentioned JFK before, but like Enemy of the State, the TV show 24.
Yeah.
I want to show, do we have a JFK clip, right? Yeah, I want to show a clip from JFK and ask you some questions about this. Because this is an information delivery machine, this movie, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's take a look at this. So that's a lot of information. And like that's the opposite of that scene that we saw from the Parallax View. And like not only is it like an endless stream of facts, right? It's like they're reading a dossier to you, but there's all this other stuff going on.
Right. Well, it's the other stuff that makes it not feel like you're just getting an exposition dump, which it basically is.
Right.
But it's the drama. It's the one person arguing for the one side and then Kevin Costner pushing back that makes you feel like you're just watching two people in an argument, and it's Trojan horsing all this exposition to you. Yeah, it's you're right. It's like the opposite of the Parallax View in that sense, because it's an info dump. It's dialogue, but it's almost not about that, right? It's about the parent. You know what I'm just realizing as I'm watching the clip? It's a murder mystery.
Yeah.
This is a murder mystery. This is who killed JFK.
Right.
You know, we know the guy who potentially might have pulled the trigger, but it's engaging you on a level of, well, who's right in this? You know, who here are the suspects. It's that scene in any Law and Order episode where they're going over the facts, and you're kind of going along with them, putting the puzzle pieces together. That's what this scene is doing. That's what, and that's how he kind of sneaks in the exposition without you knowing it.
Right. Yeah, and there's also this kind of like informational buzz that's happening where they're talking. Sometimes more than one person is arguing, And then on top of that, you're cutting to these clips,
Yeah.
some of which are themselves like a paranoid thriller. Like it feels like, you're seeing like, when Oswald walks in to talk to somebody at that desk, it looks like it's a surveillance camera that took it.
Right.
It's like, where is this from?
Right.
I mean, and the entire thing, it's like, I am starting to feel like I'm losing my mind when I
Right.
watch that scene.
Well, remember the Mr. X scene?
With Donald Sutherland.
Donald
Yes.
Sutherland.
Yes.
So that's not a real person.
No,
That's-
that's Fletcher Prouty, who was an advisor on the movie.
Plus like 3 other people, I think.
Yeah.
And he created this character, and he literally just sits on a park bench with Kevin Costner and does this huge exposition dump.
It's one of the biggest exposition dumps in the history of movies.
But I think it just works, and that there's no drama, right? It's just Donald Sutherland talking. But I think it's because it's Donald Sutherland that it works.
Yes. Yeah, that's the only reason.
I can't quite put my finger on why it works other than Donald Sutherland's an amazing actor.
In fact, when that movie was in theaters, I actually went back and I saw it a couple of times in theater, and then I went back a couple more times. It was playing at the I was in college when it was showing. I went back to the student center and saw it 2 or 3 more times, and I timed it just so I could watch that scene with Sutherland again.
This scene, yeah.
That's a perfect example. But you actually have a little bit of that on your shows. Like you've hired, I can tell that there've got to be some times where you're hiring certain actors. Like
Michael Christopher.
That was the first person I thought of. And
yeah.
you scored him with a piece of music from the Parallax View.
Absolutely.
As if to say, I've seen it.
Yeah, exactly. For sure. And it really takes a certain kind of actor with a certain kind of stature, where when he or she starts talking, you are just hanging on every word. And I don't know what it is, it's just a certain quality. And that's the only time I think you can get away with delivering information but it's still in the vein of a murder mystery. It's Deep Throat, right?
Right.
It's the person in the garage suddenly giving you a bunch of answers. And as you're listening, you're getting more intrigued, and then by the end of the scene, you don't have the answer. You have 20 million more questions.
Yeah. Hal Holbrook in the parking garage, like that scene.
Yeah.
Basically, that scene did for parking garages what Psycho did for showers, and what Jaws did for the beach. Like I swear to God, every time I go into a parking garage, I'm like, Hal Holbrook is hiding behind that pillar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
yeah. Do you think I think that your work has tapped into that vein. And obviously people respond to it, and what is it about the time? We know what it is that's making us paranoid right now.
It's pretty fucking obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I wrote Mr. Robot, as I started getting paranoid, and really stemming from technology. I obviously I was reading up about hacking, 20 years ago, but it was starting to get a lot more prevalent in the last 10 years, but it still was not in the public conversation. And then I believe, so that's kind of, and then there are other factors, that just the financial collapse, our mistrust, so the 2008 financial collapse, sort of our mistrust with financial institutions in general. It was like evil corporations. No, that's not a joke. They're really fucking evil, right? And then all the privacy concerns that are coming out about Facebook and Google and all these companies where they own all the shit on you and selling it to the highest bidder. And then when I wrote Mr. Robot, the day we got picked up, this is before, so we shot the pilot and the network picked it up to series. So before anyone saw it, the day we got picked up was the same day of the Sony hack.
Right.
And I just remember thinking, what a weird timing, right? But that first season, it kept happening. There was all these in tandem things where we really just kind of had our finger on the pulse inadvertently. It's not like we're fortune tellers or anything. But it just so happens my interest in it sort of started to align with the public starting to get more knowledgeable about what is actually going on. So the North Koreans just hacked Sony, and then, look, our tagline for the first season was, our democracy was hacked.
Right.
Then a year later it
Oddly
happens.
prescient.
Yeah, a year later it happens. And who knows, could probably happen before, and it just became public in 2016. We don't really know, but that's the kind of stuff that we just sort of, I don't know, again, it was something I was reading about, something that I was in tune with, but it just became this sort of more public conversation after the show came out.
And then in Homecoming, you've got like almost, I think, a couple of additional layers to that, because there's this whole thing happening with whether or not we can trust our memories.
Right.
Whether we can trust our own identity. Like, are we the person that we think we are?
Right.
You know, that's...
Well, and then there's that question of just, you know, big pharma, right? Pharmaceuticals, they're gaining tons of power. In fact, I think I read an article that I think the highest paid CEOs or executives are all the pharmaceutical companies, specifically the ones that are making Oxy and all the, you know, the opioid crisis. Tons of executives are banking all this money on it, but that's just right. That's the addiction. But what about all these sort of mood-altering medication? Who the fuck knows how that's sort of influencing and affecting our society?
Yeah.
And so there hasn't been a lot of movies about. I mean, in fact, I think I remember one that I thought was really cool at the time. Side Effects. Right. The Steven Soderbergh film, which was an interesting paranoid thriller in its own right. But that to me was just, when Homecoming came around, that to me was like tapping into a whole other, to put technology aside, you know, biology. I mean,
yes,
literally,
yes.
Our you know, our genetics, our physical matter, for that to be manipulated without us knowing about it.
Well, in the alliance, you know, the crossing of the military and the pharmaceutical industry is like that's an axis of the paranoid thriller that I don't know has really been explored in quite that way before. Right. And yeah, a friend of mine is actually has done a movie that's about veterans from the Iraq War in Afghanistan with PTSD, and what inspired her to do it was that people, you know, the VA was treating these soldiers, and basically they were treating their PTSD as a result of having been in these war zones as a disorder. You know, i.e., it's unnatural for you to have these feelings.
Right.
Right? So it's almost like they're treating the symptoms, and it's like, well, the cause of it is you sent these people into a war zone.
Right. It is not natural to kill other people. Right. And yet it's being treated as if, oh, there's something wrong with you because you came back from murdering tons of people, and now you have
and here's
anxiety.
A pill to make you forget.
Yeah.
Basically.
I mean, it's like a funhouse mirror sometimes, and I do think that's big. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if these things come in waves, but all of that is sort of the mistrust with pharmaceuticals, the mistrust with technology, and that's all sort of hitting this crescendo with the military-industrial complex, government, big corporations. I guess it's a good time to make paranoid thrillers. You know,
yes. Thanks, world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, yeah. It's like maybe the richest environment for the paranoid thriller since the 70s.
Yeah.
Very possibly.
Yeah, and think about that. In the 70s, it was that one incident. It was Nixon, and then you can kind of maybe go, you know, say that sort of started from the Jfk assassination and then the other string of assassinations.
Yeah, and Vietnam.
And Vietnam.
Yeah, the whole military-industrial thing.
Yes.
Yes.
But this is just, I mean, Trump blows Nixon out of the water. I mean, Trump is 10 times worse as Nixon, and he won't come down. Like, we can't bring him down.
Yeah.
I mean.
Well, this is another thing. Now, we have been raised on generation after generation of movies, including some of these paranoid thrillers that we both love, where the end of the story is they get somebody on tape saying incriminating stuff, right, and they play it for the public, and the public is so outraged that the person goes to jail or has to resign. Right. Can we even do that in stories anymore now?
I don't know. I don't think so. Because you wouldn't buy it. I mean, I feel like Trump, we don't even catch him on tape. He just tweets out admission after admission, and it doesn't seem to matter. And there weirdly feels a little bit more of a hopelessness.
Yeah.
But
what if you brought the truth to light and nobody cared?
That's a
level of paranoia that I don't think any of these 70s movies got into.
That's what I'm saying.
The question was, can we find the truth and bring it to the world, or
Or does that matter?
Right. It's like basically,
difference?
Can we get to the truth? And if you can get to the truth, then you're going to be okay. And then the question in the story is this the kind of story where they get the truth, or the kind of story where they don't?
Right.
Those were the kind of the binaries. And there's all these things you can do within that. But now we're at I don't know if that binary really works anymore.
Right. Right.
You know, so in a sense, every thriller becomes a paranoid thriller now.
Right. I mean, the ending of 3 Days of the Condor, again, not to spoil it for you guys, but you guys really should see 3 Days of the Condor. But
it's almost 40 years old. I think it's good.
He exposes him. He goes to the New York Times.
He goes to the New York Times.
It doesn't matter.
No.
Does not fucking matter. That is the true horror. That is that kind of. That's why I'm saying I think endings of these films are interesting because they do get the victory, but it doesn't seem to actually affect change. The institution will always win.
Right. The house always wins.
Yeah.
Yeah. What can you tell us about the new season of Mr. Robot?
God. What do you guys want to know? I feel like.
What's going to happen?
When is it going to happen?
That's what we said. What's going to happen? Like,
what's
seriously?
going to happen?
Really?
Well, you don't want me to tell you what's going to happen.
Yeah.
When? It's going to come out later this year. When? What, do you guys want to know the exact date?
Not really, but the month.
Not really.
I can't. I wish I could. I can't. But it will come out later this year. I promise you. I'm working on it right now.
What are you going to predict this time?
Oh, I hope I don't predict anything. Guys, when the stuff would overlap with reality, I did not feel good about that. You know, it actually felt very weird.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking maybe that Mr. Roa should just start having happy endings if we're going to start predicting things.
I wear a Democracy's hack T-shirt, like still, and people think that it's for like.
Again, I don't feel good about that.
Yes.
I mean, look at where we're at.
It's for Trump, people think.
Yeah.
I almost want to ask you, like, what do you think's going to happen next year? Yeah. But I'm afraid to know the answer.
I'm afraid to answer, so we'll just leave it at that.
Right. Well, and so unfortunately, that went by faster than I thought. We're out of time.
Oh, no.
We're out of time.
Okay.
But thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
All right.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
And guys, this movie is great. Stick around.
Yes. Eyes Wide Shut. We didn't even talk about Eyes Wide Shut, but we got Eyes Wide Shut right after this.
35mm print.
And can you just briefly say, like, why you picked this one out of all the paranoid thrillers?
I think I would say it's probably Kubrick's only paranoid thriller, and he's the best, I think, the best filmmaker that ever lived. So if you're going to watch a paranoid thriller, watch it by the master. We
have a certain actress in the house that you know, don't we?
I do. We do have a certain actress. I can give you this one little tidbit. The actress that is in the house does make an appearance on this season of Mr. Robot.
And who might that person be?
My lovely wife, Emmy Rossum, who's sitting there in the back.
All right.
And by the way, another reason why I wanted to show Eyes Wide Shut is it is set over
Christmas.
Right, and which is one of the big reasons why I wanted this last season of Mr. Robot to be also set over.
A lot of the paranoid thrillers are set at Christmas for some crazy reason, but yes, Christmas, a great time to feel paranoid.
Exactly.
So anyway, thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.